Warm greetings. Welcome to Swayam Online Learning Portal. I am Dr. S. Ishwari, Head of the Department of Geography, Madras Christian College. So, in the previous lecture, we have discussed about the local winds. So, in this lecture, we will be discussing on El Nino, La Nina and ENSO. So, what all the contents we are going to discuss in this lecture? That is El Nino and its impact on Indian monsoon, Walker's circulation and El Nino sudden oscillation and Indian monsoon. The next one we will be discussing is the El Nino Mudaki and the effects and mitigation strategies of these El Nino, La Nina and ENSO patterns. So, these are all the contents we are going to discuss in this lecture. So, El Nino, La Nina and ENSO, El Nino Mudaki. So, the El Nino Mudaki, all these terms derived from Spanish. So, what does it means? That is, El Nino means male child, La Nina means female child. So, we will be discussing why this name have been given to this El Nino and La Nina. These process occurs in tropical, equatorial, Pacific Ocean. So, this Pacific Ocean plays a important role for these processes. So, the region which is confined is tropical region. The El Nino refers to the occasional warming of ocean surface water along with Ecuador and Peru coast. That is, Ecuador and Peru coast is in which continent? That is South America. And so, this was the relationship, that is the process which is going to happen in this Pacific Ocean, Ecuador and Peru and Australia and Indonesian archipelagos. So, these were all the regions which will be connected to these processes. That is the El Nino, that is a warming reduces the usual upwelling of cold nutrient rich deep ocean water. That is, here you have the rich fishery zone. So, this fishery zone is because of upwelling of water. So, this upwelling of water is mainly due to what? That is mainly due to the cold condition which is prevailing in this ocean. That is this we call it as Western Pacific side and this we call it as Eastern Pacific region. So, in the Eastern Pacific region usually it will be a cold condition. So, this was the main reason for the upwelling and then the nutritious content of that particular region. So, this was restricted due to the warming effect. The El Nino normally occurs around Christmas. So, during the Christmas Eve, this El Nino is witnessed, that is during 24th or 25th of December, this pattern, that is El Nino, will be witnessed. So, because of this, what we mentioned, this is Christmas is mainly the birth of Christ. So, birth of Christ means it is associated with birth of male child. So, because of this, it is named as the El Nino is termed as the male child. So, it usually lasts for few weeks to few months. So, the duration of this El Nino effect is for usually for few weeks and few months only. El Nino, that is in the normal condition. So, now we are going to discuss what is the condition in the normal years and what is the condition in the El Nino years. So, first we will be discussing about the normal year condition. So, in the normal year, the surface low pressure forms in northern Australia and Indonesia. So, here you can see the normal year. So, in the normal year you have the warming condition in this region, that is Australia and Indonesian region. So, because of this warmness, what happened? So, low pressure will be prevailing in this region and high pressure exists in the Peru coast. So, here you have the Peru. So, Peru coast you have the that is high pressure. So, here you have low pressure, here you have high pressure. So, this pressure sets a cause of strong easterly trade wind blowing from east to west across the Pacific Ocean. So, always the wind will be travelling from high pressure towards the low pressure. So, there will be a strong easterly wind in this situation. So, in the normal year there will be a strong wind condition. So, this was the pattern in the normal years, and so this easterly trade wind pushed the warm surface water westward. So, see here it is pushing this one towards the west side, western Pacific side, because here there is a low pressure. So, this was the pattern travel of that wind in this Pacific Ocean. Which causes the convective storm in Indonesia and coastal Australia. So, because of this, what happened, this region forms the cloud and there will be a rainfall in this particular coast, that is Australian Indonesian part, that is Western Pacific Ocean. So, along with the Peru coast, the cold, nutritious, rich, deep water upwells to replace the displaced warm surface water. So, here the warm nature is in the western side. What happens to the eastern side? Here it is cold. So, because of the cold condition, there is a upwelling of water, so which leads to the nutritious content, rich nutritious content, which in turn enhances the fisheries in that particular Peru coast. Next one is the Walker circulation. This Walker circulation is most important. It is occurring in normal years. So, we have discussed what is meant by normal years condition. So, that pattern will be occurred in this Walker circulation. The Walker circulation is also known as Walker cell. It is derived from pressure gradient between high pressure over the eastern Pacific. So, in the eastern Pacific what happened? So, here it is a high pressure in the eastern Pacific region and low pressure in over the Indonesia. So, in this region you have the low pressure. So, this situation where you have seen the same condition have been prevailed in normal years. So, it is mentioned as occurs during normal years. The thermocline, what is meant by thermocline? It is a temperature gradient separating is the most important one, separating layers of different temperature in water bodies. So, here you can see the thermocline, here is a warm condition, here is the cold condition. So, in between this is the separating part, that is thermocline. So, what is the work of this thermocline? We will be discussing now. The Walker cell influences the upwelling along the Peru Ecuador coast. So, because of this there is a upwelling process in this Peruvian coast. The upwelling brings the nutritious rich cold water to the surface, boosting the fish stocks. So, because of this upwelling there is a rich fish stocks in the Peruvian region, that is this region. During the El Nino year, so we have completed with the normal year, and then normal year is associated with the Walker circulation, Walker cell. The next one is El Nino year. In the El Nino year, the air pressure drops over a large area in central Pacific along the coast of South America. So, what happens? See here there is a drop in the pressure. So, in the earlier time there was a high pressure in this region in normal years, but here there is a low pressure due to the warm condition in the Peruvian coast, that is South America. The normal low pressure system is replaced by weak high in the western Pacific, that is it is also known as southern oscillation. So, southern oscillation. So, why this one happen is because of the weak high in the western Pacific. So, here you have the weak condition. So, weak condition which have the high pressure here. So, there is a vice versa situation from the normal condition to the El Nino year condition. This change in pressure pattern causes the trade wind to reduce and weak Walker cell. So, if the Walker cell is weak, this term is most important. If the Walker cell is weak, it is known as El Nino year. So, this is the main catch you have to understand in this El Nino process. So, it reduces the trade wind, allows the equatorial countercurrent to accumulate the warm water along the Peru Ecuador coast. So, because of this trade wind weakness, it occurs a warm condition in the Peruvian coast, and warm water accumulates, deepens the thermocline in the eastern Pacific, cutting off the cold water upwelling. So, here you can see there is a thermocline region. So, in the Walker circulation, we have discussed about the thermocline. So, this thermocline is somewhat disturbed in this situation. So, because of that, what happens? There is a warm condition between these two regions, and it entirely stop the upwelling. So, the upwelling process is barred in this Peruvian coast. So, because of this, what happened? The nutrition content in this particular coast is lost. So, there is no, it adversely affect the fisheries. So, what are all the adverse impacts of it, that is impact of El Nino, that is drought is prevailing in the western Pacific because of there is no rain here, there is a vice versa situation, the rain will be here because of high temperature, here there is no rain. So, because of that drought condition in the western Pacific region and heavy rain along the equatorial South America, here you have the heavy rain downpour. And convective storms and hurricanes is formed in the central Pacific. So, here you can witness the hurricane and storms in the central Pacific. So, this was the adverse effect of the El Nino year. El Nino impact on monsoon rainfall in India. So, what is the association between El Nino and monsoon of India? That is, El Nino and Indian monsoon shares the inverse relationship. So, you imagine that the what is happening here in this Australia and then Indonesian region, that is a western Pacific, will adversely affect the Indian subcontinent. So, why the wind which is blowing there, whether it may be a cold wind or it may be a warm wind, will travel along its path towards the Indian subcontinent. So, in such a way it impacts the Indian monsoon. So, what is the adverse effect which we have witnessed, that is which India have witnessed? That is 6 major Indian droughts since 1871 have coined because of El Nino events. Out of it, the most important is in the year 2002 and 2009. So, it is not all the El Nino years will bring the drought conditions. Some exemption is there, that is in the year 1997 and 98, despite there is a strong El Nino, it does not cause drought situation. Why this condition? It is because of the influence of IOD. What is meant by IOD? That is Indian Ocean Dipole. So, what is meant by dipole? So, dipole you will be learning in the upcoming slides. The El Nino impact on Indian monsoon will be a moderate El Nino in the even though it is moderate El Nino in the 2002, it led one of the worst drought condition in India. The El Nino adversely affect Indian agrarian economy by reducing summer crop yield. That is, India is an agricultural country which mainly depends upon the monsoon for its water resources. Because of it, it gives an adverse effect in the Indian subcontinent. So, the rice cultivation, sugarcane cultivation, cotton and oil seeds, all these crops have been adversely affected because of this El Nino drought condition. The lower agricultural output, if the agricultural output is lower, it increases in the inflation, and it also slows down the GDP growth, as the agricultural contribution is 14% in India's economy. So, India's economy is mostly dependent on agricultural sector. So, this is adversely affected because of this El Nino. The atmospheric effect of El Nino. So, what is the atmospheric effect? That is the decreased SOI. SOI means that is the Southern Oscillation Index. So, it indicates the low pressure over the eastern Pacific. So, in the eastern Pacific, that is the Peruvian region, South American region, the convectional shifts eastwards. So, it is shifting eastwards and bringing the heavy rain and flooding in South America, which we have discussed in previous slides. So, Western Pacific, that is the Australia and Indonesia, experiences the suppressed convection and droughts. So, because of the that is opposite reaction in that particular pattern, that is in the El Nino. So, there is a suppressed convection is there. There is no rain in the Western Pacific region, that is the Australian Indonesian region. The jet stream are displaced and altered mid latitude storms. So, this El Nino is also affecting the jet stream path as well as the mid latitude storm tracks. The atmospheric teleconnections cause heat wave, flood, cold anomalies in the distant region. It not only affect the region, that is the Western Pacific coast alone, it is also traveling towards the faraway region, distant region, and it is also affecting the other distant regions also. Ocean effect on El Nino, that is the sea surface temperature rises 2 to 3 degrees Celsius above normal. It is not in the normal condition, it is rising up, it is shooting up. So, the weak upwelling reduces the nutrient supply, causing the decline in the fish population in the that is the eastern Pacific coast, that is the South American coastal region. The ocean current shifts, allowing the warm water to spread the eastward. So, it is shifting from the west towards east. So, this was the major travel pattern of this El Nino. The high sea level may lead to increased coastal erosion. So, because of the sea level increases, it also increases the erosional activity in the sea region, that is coastal region. The thermocline depth changes influences the global oceanic circulation. So, in the previous slide what we have discussed, because of there is a change in the thermocline in the central part of the Pacific Ocean, it influences the that is upwelling of the water in the Peruvian coast. So, that adverse situation will be happening because of this El Nino. Next one is the El Nino Southern Oscillation, that we call it as ENSO. So, El Nino formation is linked with the Pacific circulation pattern. So, this two linkage, that is El Nino formation and then Southern Pacific circulation pattern, together known as Southern Oscillation. So, the Southern Oscillation is interannual fluctuation in the atmospheric pressure. The atmospheric pressure, not only the water bodies, the ocean surface is disturbed, it is also associated with the atmospheric pressure. So, over the tropical Indo-Pacific region. So, which region it is influencing? It is influencing in the tropical Indo-Pacific region. The El Nino and Southern Oscillation usually occurs together. So, these both are interconnected, forming the ENSO pattern. So, this El Nino plus Southern Oscillation called as ENSO. So, El Nino, what is the situation? Warm water in the eastern Pacific. So, in the eastern Pacific, in the El Nino year, here you have the warm water. And then Southern Oscillation, what happened? Here you have the low pressure over the eastern Pacific. So, here because of warm condition, there is a low pressure and high pressure over the western Pacific. So, here you have the high pressure. So, as there is an interconnection between the El Nino and the air circulation, that is air pressure. So, here the pressure is influenced. So, this pattern is together known as ENSO, that is warm water and low pressure. Here you have the warm water and then low pressure in this eastern coast, and then cold water and high pressure. Here you have cold water and high pressure in the western coast. This together called as ENSO. So, Southern Oscillation have the periodicity. So, periodicity, how often it is occurring? That is, Southern Oscillation occurs irregularly. It is not having a fixed pattern. It is irregular in nature, but with the period of 2 to 5 years. It may be in once in a 2 years, or it may be in once in a 5 years. This Southern Oscillation Index, SOI, measures the southern oscillation intensity. How the intensity is measured? With the help of SOI, that is southern oscillation index. So, this southern oscillation index, the pressure difference between Tahi, that is in central Pacific. So, you have here the location of Tahi and then the Port Darwin. So, you have the Port Darwin here. So, here you have one pole, here you have another pole. So, this too is a dipole. So, in the previous slide we have discussed about the Indian Ocean dipole. So, here it is not an Indian Ocean dipole, but what is meant by dipole? So, this dipole characteristics you can witness in this Pacific region also, that is central Pacific region also. The positive, if it is going to be a positive SOI value, there will be a good rainfall in India. If it is going to be a negative SOI value, there will be a poor rainfall in India. So, in such a way the SOI is adversely affecting the rainfall pattern of India. Southern Oscillation Index and Indian monsoon. So, this SO pattern is a seesaw pattern. So, there is a relationship between atmospheric changes as well as the eastern and western Pacific. So, there is a warm temperature which is associated with what? The temperature is high, the pressure will be low. So, if it is going to be a cold temperature, cool temperature, then the pressure will be high. So, there will be a seesaw pattern in SO, that is southern oscillation. The low pressure and rising air over the western Pacific are linked with good monsoon rainfall in India. So, in this western Pacific, if there is a warm condition here, and because of this warm condition, if there is a low pressure here, there will be a good rainfall in the Indian subcontinent. So, the rain which have been received in this western Pacific region will be carrying its moisture to the Indian subcontinent. So, this was the situation. So, southern oscillation index and Indian monsoon is during the El Nino year, the SO, that is southern oscillation, shift eastwards, that is it is shifting the eastward side, reducing the monsoon rainfall in India. So, if it is going to shift in the eastern Pacific region, this region will not be experiencing the rainfall. So, because of the dry condition here, it also leads the dry condition in the Indian subcontinent. So, this was the correlation between the SOI and then Indian monsoon. So, because of their close link, that is El Nino, which is termed as AEN, and southern oscillation, which is also known as SO, it is together known as ENSO event is happening throughout the Earth's surface, that is especially in the Pacific Ocean. The ENSO and Indian monsoon. El Nino causes the weak monsoon, deficit rainfall, rising drought risk in India. If it is going to be La Nina, it brings strong monsoon, excessive rainfall which increases the flood risk. So, here you can see the map, there is a deficit in rainfall. If it is going to be La Nina, there will be an opposite reaction, the rainfall will be high. There will be a plenty of water in the Indian subcontinent. So, this was the situation in India. That ENSO affects the monsoon timing, strength and spread across the India. So, this was the adverse effect of ENSO. The agriculture and water resources is highly dependent on the monsoon variability. So, if there is a high rainfall, there will be a favorable condition for agriculture as well as the recharging of water in Indian subcontinent. So, if it is not so, there will be a drought situation in Indian subcontinent. The forecasting ENSO helps the farmer and planner to optimize the crop and water use. So, how far the ENSO pattern will be there. So, if the forecast is done there, it will be much supportive for the farmers in India. ENSO and marine ecosystem, that is if it is going to be El Nino, the coral bleaching from warm waters harm the biodiversity. So, because of warm water, there is a coral bleaching and it also affect all the marine features inside the ocean. And if it is going to be La Nina, it brings cool waters that is the marine life have a favorable situation, there is a upwelling and there is a supporting factor for the fisheries. The sea surface temperature SST changes affect the marine food chains and then nutrient supply. So, the nutrient supply and marine condition is mainly associated with the sea surface temperature. The temperature is high, so it will be in this situation. If the temperature is somewhat cool, that is low temperature, it will be favorable situation in this region. So, this was the association between SST and the marine ecosystem. The coastal economies reliant on marine resources experience significantly impacted. So, because of this coastal economy is influenced, because of ENSO, this coastal ecosystem is much more influenced. So, ENSO and health, that is in El Nino, which leads to heat wave, water scarcity, high risk of waterborne diseases. So, because of this El Nino effect, there is a waterborne diseases shooting up. And if it is going to be La Nina, it causes the wetter condition which increases the malaria and vector-borne diseases. So, the malaria and vector-borne diseases are increased because of La Nina effect. The extreme weather events put pressure on public health system. So, the public health system is adversely put into pressure because of this El Nino, La Nina patterns. The ENSO based monitoring aids preventing the health risk. So, if these adverse conditions are monitored, forecasted, so this adverse situation can be somewhat controlled. The climate sensitive diseases follow seasonal and regional pattern influencing the ENSO. So, La Nina, what is meant by La Nina? After the El Nino, the event weather condition usually return back to normal situation. So, La Nina, after La Nina, it becomes the normal condition. So, sometimes the trade wind strength abnormally. So, sometime what happened, the trade wind, if it is going to be weak, it leads to El Nino. If it becomes the if it strengthen, it leads to La Nina, that is cold water to accumulate the central and eastern Pacific. So, this event is known as La Nina. La Nina means, keep in your mind, that is it is a cold situation. La Nina, the strong La Nina in 1998 likely caused the summer drought in central North America, and also the Atlantic Ocean also experienced very active hurricane season in 1998 and 1999. The Hurricane Mitch in 1998 was the strongest in October hurricane in about 100 years of record. So, this was the adverse effect of La Nina. So, El Nino Mudaki, what is meant by El Nino Mudaki? So, this El Nino Mudaki, the name which have been originated by Japanese, so which means the similar but different. So, what is that similar and different? That is El Nino Mudaki features a strong warming in the central tropical Pacific and cooling in the eastern and western Pacific, and also called the Central Pacific Nino. It differs in the shifting of sea surface temperature changes to Central Pacific North in the eastern part. So, you can look at the diagram, that is in the normal El Nino event, the warmer will be there in the eastern Pacific region. Here there will be a cold condition. So, in the El Nino Mudaki, what happens? So, there will be a warm situation in the center of the Pacific Ocean, and this western and eastern region have the cold condition. So, the warm condition should in the central region. So, it is known as El Nino Mudaki. So, instead of the eastern Pacific, it is warming in the central region. And here the La Nina. What is the effect of La Nina? The cold condition prevails in the eastern coastal region and warm here in the western Pacific region. But here in the La Nina Mudaki, what happens? The warmer condition will be there in the western as well as the eastern Pacific region, but in the central region, that is central Pacific region, there is a cold condition. So, because of that, the circulation of air is from the central region. So, if it is going to be El Nino Mudaki, the warmer situation will prevail and there is a circulation from the central region towards the west and east. In the La Nina Mudaki, there will be a cooling effect in the central Pacific, and that is cool water circulation will be from the central to the western and eastern Pacific coast. So, this was the entire concept of El Nino Mudaki. So, the El Nino Mudaki coupled with ocean atmosphere phenomena and in the tropical Pacific, it differ from another coupled phenomena, that is, it is also known as the El Nino, and because of that the conventional El Nino is characterized by strong anomalies warming in the eastern equatorial Pacific. So, the impact of this agriculture is the El Nino brings the drought in Asia and it leads to the crop failure and food shortage. The La Nina, which has the excess rainfall which leads to the flooding and damage of crops. The rainfall and temperature extremes disturbs the sowing and harvesting schedules of the region. So, the crop yield varies globally because of this adverse patterns, climatic patterns and oceanic pattern, which results in the economic loss. The ENSO forecast helps the farmers and government and plan adopts. So, what is the impact of the fisheries? So, the impact is that because of the upwelling water, what happens? There is a nutrition content will be high in this eastern coastal region, which supports the fisheries activities in this region. The next one is the mitigation strategies. The early warning of ENSO forecast will help to anticipate the climate impacts. So, adaptive crops and water management strategies can be done with the help of forecasting. So, the planning infrastructure withstands the flood and drought condition of that particular region. So, if it is going to be an international collaboration for these disaster preparedness, it will support the region to come up with the better ideas. The conduct of public awareness campaign will support and enhance the socio-economic effects. To sum up with the entire lecture, that is, the ENSO is coupled with the oceanic atmospheric system that causes the El Nino and La Nina event, which leads to the global changes in rainfall, temperature and winds. It strongly affects monsoon, cyclones, agriculture and human activities, while monitoring and early warning system helps the reduce of impacts that may intensify under climate change. So, I hope you understand the entire concept of El Nino, La Nina and ENSO. So, in the upcoming lecture, we will be discussing on humidity concepts, importance and measurements. Thank you.